Hello and happy Monday. Welcome to our next phase where instead of Paul and Mary and I kind of teaming up and then Mary kind of leading the last few weeks with marketing, I'm kind of leading this week with the largest video, if you will, discussing your branding guides. And everything you've done up to this, including some things you just heard from Mary in her video in this learning plan, you need to do those before you jump into this topic. So you don't just start creating a logo 3 weeks ago because you have an idea. You don't have an idea until you know who your target market is, who your customers are, what their wants and needs are, and what they and their market will bear. So we're going to go through branding guides from a graphic design perspective. So this week you're being tasked with starting your brand style guide. So what is this? In a nutshell, it's a rule book and a reference tool. It's a rule book in that it explains how an organization presents itself to the outside world through their logo, their font choices, their color choices, photography choices, and more. It's a reference guide because other people can use it to help maintain consistency in what a brand looks, feels, and sounds like. So it ensures that your brand looks and feels the same even when you have multiple people working on it in different areas. So perfect for this class. You have marketers, designers, and developers working on this brand, but you are working in a cohesive voice. Why do we need one? Well, your brand identity serves as your company's personality. You've all been given a target market and a subgroup within that, so very, very specific, and you've been given a product category. You need to figure out how you're going to enter that category and market to your tiny segment and what your personality is going to be. So how the world is going to recognize and trust you. And this has to stay consistent across everything you do in your brand, and the style guide makes that possible. So before you begin, you must know your brand. Market research must be done prior to this step. So what you've done in the last 2 weeks and what you're going to do this week for Mary, after you've watched her video, you'll understand the pieces you need there, which you already have. So are you ready to move on? And the answer is yes. So thanks to all the research and homework you've done, you're ready. So you should know by now, or are finalizing this week maybe, your company's mission, its vision, the target audience, the brand's personality, and your core values. So there are 5 steps to this brand style guide: collecting inspiration, defining the 6 essential elements, which is what we're really going to focus on here, making a list of all collateral your guide should cover. So are you only going to be used in print? Will you be digital? Will you be in packaging, social media? Then you're going to make an outline for this brand guide and you're going to create it. And then in the real world, we would also be planning for the evolution of a brand. Brands don't stay consistent over 60 years. If you think of some logos that existed 60 years ago and those companies are still in business, their brand has evolved and their logo, along with a lot of other brand topics, have also evolved. Step 1 is a fun one: collect inspiration. So you, your client, your coworkers, whoever is in on this project should be collecting and saving imagery or icons or words or anything that feels on brand. A great way to do this is for you and others to make a Pinterest board. So what does the company's core values, what do they mean to you personally? So once you establish those core values, maybe all 3 of you on your team think about that and collect some imagery that speaks to that. What other brands do you like? What questions keep coming up? If the same questions keep coming up over multiple people thinking about this brand, maybe it's something you need to address. Step 2 is the big one that we're going to work on, and that is the 6 essential brand guide elements. And if we start at the top with the brand story, or at 12 o'clock, that's something that you've done in marketing. Mary's talked about that. And if we finish over at like 11 o'clock with voice, that is also driven by your marketing staff and marketing people if you have them. So I'm going to focus on the other 4 Logo, color, type, and imagery. So the first one is your logo guidelines. So you have a logo established, but you have to establish now some rules, how it's going to look in different environments, rules that they have to follow, things that they can do, things that they can't do. An important one, do not stretch, alter, condense, or realign. This is the correct width of the apple. This is where somebody took one of the bounding boxes and squished it in disproportionately. And graphic designers, you know that we hate this. You cannot do this. So all the logo rules, all of the approved versions, and when and how to use each one. Use visual examples to make it clear. Sizing, you must list, or you should list, the minimum size they can ever use it. So the smallest you can ever use our logo in print is, on the web is, or digital is. If you require some breathing room around your logo, that white space or padding, you need to give the details. You need to show the colors and the variations that are allowed, what your logo looks like reversed in color and in black and white, and when it is appropriate to use them. And actually containing some don't examples can be just as helpful. People like visual references. So here is an example of showing some of these. These are 3 logo versions that are okay. This is the amount of spacing and breathing room that we want. Red on white is acceptable. Red on blue is a no. Boy, this is really pixelated at my large Mac screen size. The company Medium shows some variations of how the colors can be used and some don'ts. You could hardly see the red lines, so I attempted to scribble them out, but I'll move on here. Minimum sizes. Spotify has told people in their digital brand guide that if you're using it digitally, it needs to be a minimum of 70 pixels wide when it's the icon and the words. In print, it needs to be a minimum of 0.8 inches. Other brands down here that you can see is showing the spacing guideline, how much breathing room or padding is required around their logo. So thinking about your color palette. As designers, we love color. We know that color has feelings, emotions. It makes people think a certain way or perceive you a certain way, but we don't get crazy with our colors. Most brands are choosing 4 or fewer main colors. So maybe think about what's going to be your light color for your background, your dark color for your text, perhaps a neutral hue, and one that pops if you're going for all 4. Certainly you can envision some that are simply one color, period. So in your branding guide, you need to show swatches of your brand colors and include detailed information of how they can be reproduced in various formats. The Pantone color, which we know is a color matching system, needs to be listed. So you can see the Pantone swatches over here. This is Heineken. They're green, they're corporate green, they're red, and they're silver. They also show you acceptable tints of what they look like, from 80% down to 20%. When this color needs to be reproduced, CMYK only for color print, here is the CMYK color coordinates. And when it's going to be digital, you provide the RGB values and or the hex codes. The hex codes aren't listed here at the moment, but that would be something also to consider including in your brand guide, is both RGB and hex. All right, one moment. So here is an example of Netflix and your core brand colors. In Netflix down here, we're looking at red, a particular RGB, hex, CMYK, and PMS, which is the Pantone color. And they show the overlay, the white, and the red. So again, specific. These are the rules that people have to abide by. So give them everything to be successful. The second big part, after we just went through color, typography. As graphic designers, we spend a whole semester discussing typography and fonts and why to use them and how to use them, how they bring personality and voice to your designs. They have historical references. So we need to pair the correct type whenever possible. Another rule of thumb that we know is that sans serif type, the ones that don't have the little feet here on the letters, much easier to reproduce and read online. And since you're working with an e-commerce site, it's going to be viewed online. So once you select the font choices for your brand, you need to explain the choice so that people understand the brand and the vision and why it works, and then give clear instructions for how it's to be used. So which one do I use for headlines? Which one for body copy? Which one for captions? How it should be aligned. It should always be centered, always aligned left, etc. How to track out and kern the letters. Tracking is when we put an equal amount of space between each letter, so it makes the word basically wider and wider. Kerning is the space between just two letters, and sometimes when two letters are side by side, the space that is naturally put in by your keyboard looks awkward, and we have to do some kerning between that letter pair. So adding ratios instead of exact numbers allows people to apply it in whatever manner they need to. We're going to talk about font weight. Are we using a bold, a condensed, italic, whatever, and hierarchy, and the color of the font to be used. So here's an example. This one is saying you're going to use Oswald in 20 to 80 point for all headers. And for the body copy, you're going to use Roboto in 10 to 20 point. The hierarchy is important. The headers are larger physically, they're larger, heavier than your body copy. Another example, Twitter and Snapchat have both chosen one font that they use for everything. They don't have a header and a body difference. Helvetica New and Avenir Next are being used by those two brands. You need to be very specific, and iHeartMedia has left nothing to chance. In their brand guide, they go on to say what you're going to use for Android products right here, what you're going to use for wearables, Apple Watches, etc. Microsoft products are specified, even automobiles are specified. Nothing is left to chance in your brand guide. Another thing in your brand guide is to use fallback choices for external use. So in our HTML, you guys remember designers and developers for sure, that when we're coding, we always give our preferred font. But if that font isn't installed on our end user's computer, we give it fallbacks. So Spotify is circular, that's their primary font. If that's not installed, however, Helvetica New is what they would prefer to be used next. If that doesn't exist, go with Arial, that's pretty safe. And if that doesn't exist, sans serif, whatever's on that device that has a sans serif font. You also need to explain the colors that are allowed for typography. And again, hex codes, RGB, and CMYK. And remember that the contrast is very important. People need to be able to read your words, so they need to have a strong contrast from their background. And then finally, what are the image guidelines? How do we handle photos, illustrations, icons? You guys on your own team, and when you're working on a project in real life or at a job, you're going to have a natural instinct for what photos and illustrations are right for your brand. But outsiders or everyone else might quite not have that same natural instinct. So you can help them with your style and branding guide in a variety of ways. You can include a section called best practices. So you would show examples of images that have performed well for your brand and how it communicates your brand. So here's some best practices. You can do aspirational. You can find what feels right from other brands and share those. And finally, you could do a mood board where you're collecting images that convey the feeling that you want people to get when they interact with your brand. Do you want them to feel that they're very trustworthy, the brand is trustworthy and safe and helpful and will not hurt them? What kind of imagery could you put on a mood board to get that feeling across, and then share that mood board within your branding guide? So here's an example from Berkeley. Their brand guidelines say that their photographic style is light, airy, and natural, and it has to fall into one of three categories: topical, cultural, or historical. So if it doesn't fall into one of those three topics and it's not light, airy, and natural, it's not good for their brand. Here's an example from Country Financial, giving very specific use cases for each and every icon that they provide. So they cover a lot of different areas. Oops. Auto and recreational, I'm assuming this is like insurance, home and property, life insurance, health insurance. So when you're specifically talking about term life insurance, this is the icon they want you to use. When you're specifically talking about insurance for a motorcycle, you're going to be using this icon. So again, nothing is left to chance. That's the whole purpose. Your brand and style guide, kind of interchangeable words there, should be a reference source and a rule book. So that covers step 2. Again, I said Mary spoke to you earlier about these two topics, but all of these pull together to be your brand, and these are the guides of what you need to have in this style book. A final step, or not a final, number 3, sorry, should be to list the other collateral that your guide should cover. So, is your brand primarily digital? Are you only on digital devices? You don't have a brick and mortar store. E-commerce certainly falls into this category. So digital, we think about things like websites, social media, banner ads, an e-commerce store. So in your brand guide, you're going to codify exactly how you lay out your images on your website. This falls into the realm of the developers. They understand this. This is their wheelhouse. They need to add this to your brand guide. Do you sell physical products? E-commerce store certainly does. You might need to think about packaging guidelines. So how will your brand be represented on letterhead, on a business card, on the physical packaging that you send out to people with your product? The boxes, the bags, the little note card inside that says, welcome to Chewy.com. Our family is ready to take care of your pets. Something like that. You have to think about what's actually printed in the deliverables. If your brand focuses on social media marketing, you might need to add guidelines on the type of imagery you're going to use in your posts. So once you've got all this together, making an outline for your branding guide, your style guide, is really fairly easy. It's not easy to actually put it together, but these are the core elements, and it is pretty easy and obvious. Your brand story. Hello. This is what we make and do. Here's our mission, vision, and values. Here's our logo and what it means to us. Here's how to use it. Very specific, like we saw earlier. Here's how to not use our logo. Don't change the colors. Don't stretch it. Don't alter it. Make sure you have this much padding, etc. Your color palette, these are our colors, and here are all the codes that go with them and how and when you should use them. Talk about your typography, your imagery, your voice. Mary talked about this. This is how we speak. And then the website, here's what the home page should look like and what you should and shouldn't put on it. And this is how we're going to display our products. This part we might be a little ahead of ourselves on. This is certainly to be included at some point, but for this first draft, you can probably kind of hold off on this topic because we're going to be getting to that in future lectures. And then step 5, in the real world, you need to be always thinking about the evolution of your brand. Naturally, in this class, we're not going to get to that because when we're done, we're done. But in the real world, you need to revisit this document every now and then, once a month, once a year, whatever you and your team decide, because things do change. And when you come up with new ideas, you need to have a place to keep them. This is the evolution of the Apple logo from 1976. If you weren't aware that this was their logo, it was. And over the years, and granted, we're now beyond 2015, but you can certainly see some changes here. We still, other than this first one, easily recognize this as Apple, but they have done some things to change it a little bit. So your brand will be evolving, and you need to be aware of that. All right, now that you're ready to begin, however, I need to stop and say this is after you've watched all the videos, Mary, Paul, me, whatever else ends up in there, and you've read all the information, you've looked at everything, then it's your time to start working. So our expectations of you in week 5. We want you to focus on building trust and interest in your brand and your e-commerce site by choosing a logo concept, some brand colors, typography, a copywriting voice, and an iconography style. So what are your icons going to look like? You need to work collaboratively, all 3 programs collaboratively to build this. Your assessment for this week, as a group, you're going to be creating the first draft of your branding guide for your website, your e-commerce site. All team members and all faculty coaches should have access to this document from within MS Teams. So it's not something one person is working on and they upload it at the end. This is a work in progress type of a document, and that's what MS Teams is perfect for, is to work collaboratively. So we need to be able to see a first draft of this. And I say first draft, but I only mean this is your first shot at it, in that it needs to be complete and well thought out, but we will give you feedback after this point. Individual participation, return to your group wiki document that you created in Teams. And this is where each and every week you need to show your individual contributions. Each student, each one of you, should have a dated entry for that week describing what you were responsible for, how you contributed, and any other information. No entry, no points. One-liners, 1 point. My point is here, be detailed. Explain how you contributed and how you deserve these individual points. Simply saying, I started a document and added a link, if that's all you did in a 4-credit course for a whole week, I'm not sure how you have earned points. You need to really speak to what you did this week. Looking back, several teams have been really good about this. They've really talked about what they've been doing, how things were assigned. Each student can have their own page and then a dated entry, or you can have a dated entry that each student fills out their section of it, either way. I also want to reiterate that this phase 1 is 25 points of your 100 points in this class. So if you take this lightly and don't put out a really good try here on this first draft of everything, you're not going to get your full 25 points by any means. The reason we did this in phases was so that we, Paul, Mary, and I, could give you feedback and help you perfect it going on to phase 2. We didn't want to wait to the end of this class, look at your final project, and say, oh my gosh, they were way off the mark. That's why we're doing this in phases. So next week, LP6 is actually a work week. There's no new videos from any of us, but after, again, I don't want to jump ahead and get you confused. This is LP5 right now. So this week, the week of September 24th, you are working on the branding guide. Next week, the one that starts September 28th, you have all week to work on putting together, phase 1. And remember, in Blackboard, there is a document on phase 1. Basically, it's covering these first 2 points. Your company and brand, what is your unique selling proposition? What sets you apart from your competition? The deliverables that we need to see are your executive summary, the name you've come up with, your logo and visual branding, and again, this is the element that we're covering right now in LP5, week 5, and the brand voice to be used in the copy. Also, something we're hitting pretty hard right now in week 5. The second part of it is your target user and customer. Who are you building this site for? And what features and functions need to be created to serve them? So the deliverables here are your user profile, something that you've worked on already in the past. Your customer journey map, again, something that you've worked on already. And the list of functionalities, actions, and features that your customers can take on the site. Again, that was from a week or two ago. So all of this you're going to be delivering, and you're also going to be providing a video that you're going to record to present this to us. Again, this is for next week, September 28th, LP6. I just want you to know where you're going with all of this. So if I back up for week 5, right now, this week, what we're expecting of you is to work on this branding guide. And your assessment will be to create the draft, have it available in MS Teams so we can give you feedback, and to include the wiki document so we know what's going on. I also wanted to point out before I finish up here that in Blackboard I have a link to a PDF, and this is a PDF on a branding guide, and it is several pages, 48, and a lot of detail. I would love it if all 3 of you would download this and look through it and be really comfortable with these ideas before you start working on your branding guide. So this is super detailed, everything that I just discussed in under 20 minutes or so, but an excellent, excellent resource. So that's all I have for you. Next up will be Paul talking about the developer standpoint at this point, what we need to think about, and I've already hit on a few of those things. A lot of these rules and guidelines that we're coming up with are often handed off to developers who are making the site, and they need to abide by them. And if they're involved in the brand from the ground up, they need to help establish these rules. So have a great week. Branding guide only this week. Next week after that will be a work week to pull everything together for phase 1. Thank you.